Kashin Koji's new shinjutsu, 10 Directions, is insane. A little too insane actually. In chapter 13 of Boruto, we found out that when Kashin Koji was on the brink of death, he awakened the shinjutsu to see multiple different timelines that could occur in the future. This ability took the world by storm, everybody was hyped, there was parades in the streets for days, and the Boruto haters crawled back under their rocks accepting yet another horrendous defeat. But since then, I have taken a step back and realised that this power is actually bad for the future of Boruto's story. So in this video, I'm going to discuss exactly why I think giving Kashin Koji this power up is a huge risk that could end up ruining Boruto as a manga, as well as how Kishimoto could resolve this issue in an extremely simple yet effective way. So the reason that delving into things such as multiple future timelines is so risky is because it can cause a manga to become riddled with plot holes. Something the Naruto series gained a reputation for was its severe amount of inconsistencies throughout the series. This is a common issue in many longer running manga, where the author forgets about certain plot points they wrote into the story much earlier, and how those same laws that they created contradict new revelations that the author is trying to introduce. So like I said, plot holes aren't necessarily going to destroy Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, but it may sacrifice a bit of its likability, as plot holes tend to take away from a story's integrity. And it may feel like for us viewers that the author just doesn't care about what they are writing, and all it becomes is some ink on a page rather than an enjoyable novel. That's why I really don't think the idea for Kashin Koji to have this power is a good idea, as Kishimoto will have to be working overtime to make sure that he doesn't create major plot holes or anything like that. And before I move on from this point and go on to other problems of this shinjutsu, I want to go over some pretty major plot holes that come directly from the introduction of this ability. So Boruto and his karma was an extremely large focus in Boruto Part 1. However, in Part 2, we see Boruto is terrified of this power and was forced to make major sacrifices to prevent his karma from being manifested. By major sacrifices, I mean by taking a break from the battlefield. Boruto knew that he was endangering not only the entirety of Konoha, but both Sarada and Himawari, something Boruto as a character would stop at nothing to save, to the point where in Part 1 he sacrificed his own life in order to protect the ones that he loved. But here we can see that he stopped himself and hid away due to his karma turning on, when he knew Himawari was literally at death's door if he didn't hurry. So the significance of Boruto's karma in Part 2 is huge, but it's the fact that he is terrified of the power itself, and this directly ties into 10 Directions. This is because Kashin Koji can see into the future, which we know he was obviously willing to do in order to enhance Boruto's training. And I think how Kishimoto intended to write this scene of Boruto holding his karma while talking to Kashin Koji for advice was all just foreshadowing that ties into the revelation we got in chapter 13. And the reason that this is a problem is because if Kashin Koji has seen into the future, and seen that Boruto, when activating his karma, will almost undoubtedly get taken over by Momoshiki, or at least something bad will occur, to the point where just the slightest activation of his karma is more of a risk than Jura was to Himawari. And Boruto knew, likely from the intel that Kashin Koji provided him with, that the power that Jura held was insurmountable to the likes of Himawari, meaning that the most likely scenario was in fact that the instant Boruto's karma activated, Momoshiki would be able to take over. Since if Kashin Koji hadn't seen multiple timelines where Boruto's karma caused Momoshiki to take over, he wouldn't have given Boruto strict instructions not to use that power. I think the main problem isn't the fact that Momoshiki would instantly take over, and more the fact that if he did, since Boruto is so stupidly strong now, Momoshiki would have an extremely strong vessel to rampage in, meaning his destructive capabilities would be so much higher than previously. And in Part 1, we saw how much of a monster Borushiki would be. This guy had some supreme Black Force haki. If this guy manifested, it was a given that bodies were going to drop. But the problem here is if Boruto can't use his karma, then why is it such a big thing in Part 1 to never be elaborated on? Also, if my prediction is correct, the Jogon, which mind you is a canon dojutsu now, is tied into the karma, then we will never see that ability. If Kashin Koji continues to tell Boruto that he can't use his karma, both don't really work narratively, and that's why I don't agree with 10 Directions. Also, wouldn't it make sense that if Kashin Koji used 10 Directions and saw the Jogon for example, and how it relied on Boruto's karma to be activated, since we know from Toneri using 10 Directions that the Jogon is going to be Boruto's biggest and greatest power up, where despite all his current strength and feats, the world will solely rely on the Jogon, that maybe Kashin Koji would have seen all that and how this power is essential and taught Boruto how to use his karma above all else, but he didn't do that. So I think you can probably see where I'm coming from here. So straight away, that's a pretty big problem which the only real way I see getting resolved is by giving a direct explanation as to why Boruto specifically in that moment wasn't using his karma. And the explanation can't be a general, oh, Boruto doesn't like using his karma. It has to be a specific reason why in that moment Boruto was so scared of his karma manifesting. And that's mainly why I don't agree with 10 directions as an ability. But plot holes aren't the only reason I'm worried about this ability. I'm also worried about the fact that it kind of takes away the anticipation for Boruto's future. I'm aware that the timeline can change as a result of fate or divine intervention, but it still gives a very solid idea for both Boruto and Kashin Koji as to what their world has in store for them. And it would be interesting to see how Kishimoto is going to be able to write it so that us viewers don't know what will happen in the future, as well as Boruto and Kashin Koji, as it seems as though Kashin Koji is able to use this ability at will and as many times as he wants, and subsequently nothing can be hidden or altered about future timelines without him seeing those changes directly. I guess you could argue that perhaps Boruto changing the future through his strong will, but how many times can Kishimoto pull that card before it becomes repetitive and loses all of its meaning? Don't get me wrong, the idea behind this power is amazing. It's insanely powerful and gives us a great insight and explanation as to how Boruto gained so much knowledge, as well as how he managed to become so powerful in the span of 3 years without using his karma whatsoever. Also, it gives Kashin Koji, who is a massive fan favourite, a true purpose in the series, other than just existing as a cool throwback to Jiraiya. So don't get me wrong, I agree with the power existing previously, and I think the hype and praise it received was very much justified, as it does link in Boruto and Naruto's story perfectly. However, for this power to continue being in the story and it being used in the future is going to introduce potentially more problems than it is worth, and possibly more than Kishimoto and Ikimoto can handle. So I alluded to this earlier, but how exactly can this power up be fixed in a way that narratively makes sense and is also impactful enough to not feel forced from Kishimoto? I think if they were to randomly say there is a limit on the amount of times that Kashin Koji can use 10 directions, then I personally would feel as though that's a bit of a stretch. And I don't agree with straight up removing a power because the author realized it was too overpowered. Like for example, the way Naruto lost Kurama was an extremely impactful and meaningful way to nerf Naruto and allow for Boruto's generation to surpass the older one. And the way it was done also made a lot of sense, giving Naruto, who was far inferior to Ishiki, the sudden burst in power to overcome Ishiki's strength, and the cost of using this mode was Kurama's life. That was all good writing. And the same goes for how Sasuke lost his Rinnegan. It makes sense to have Boruto lose control of his body, allow Momoshiki control, and how that will mentally scar Boruto even beyond the time skip, and we still see that that moment takes its toll on Boruto as a character. Both of these methods were both impactful ways to remove this power that was too overpowered for the series at the time. So I think if Kishimoto is going to take away Kashin Koji's ability, it has to be in a meaningful way. One way I think Kishimoto could do this perfectly is the same thing that happened to Doctor Strange. So let me explain this quickly. If you haven't seen Marvel Endgame, essentially Doctor Strange could see into the future and see different possibilities for what is going to happen in their timeline, and since he saw that Iron Man was important in the only future that they won, he sacrificed his treasured item in order to follow this timeline, and hence he ended up dying. So since Kashin Koji's 10 directions shinjutsu is quite similar to this, I believe that it would make sense for Kashin Koji to sacrifice himself in order to save Boruto and protect his future. Kashin Koji's overall goal is to protect Earth and to prevent Ishiki's main goal of eradicating Earth. So he thought previously that by killing Jigen, his goal would be achieved. But like he said in chapter 13, once he realized that if he died here, that even though Ishiki would be defeated, Ishiki's will would still be passed on and their world would still be in danger from Ishiki's goal. Hence why he decided to live on to fulfill his goal of eradicating all strands of Ishiki. This is why he met up with Boruto, as he knew Boruto was the star of hope that could save their world's fate, meaning that much like Kashin Koji was happy to die at the hands of Ishiki, as he thought that by doing that he had fulfilled his goals, it would also make sense for him to die trying to save Boruto, since he would be able to see into the future and see that his usefulness was much less than Boruto's, meaning that by sacrificing himself, he would ultimately still achieve his goal just by relying on Boruto instead. And this could create a beautiful moment where Kashin Koji knew from the very start that he had to die in order to save Boruto. But he didn't tell Boruto this, since he knew that Boruto wouldn't allow Kashin Koji to sacrifice himself in order to save him. And it will also tie into what Kashin Koji told Boruto in chapter 13 about how he will die to Jura. Perhaps Boruto is destined to die to Jura and Kashin Koji is right about this, but where Kashin Koji kept the truth from Boruto is the fact that Kashin Koji could end up sacrificing himself to save Boruto's fate of dying to Jura. This would tie perfectly into how Jiraiya sacrificed himself to help Naruto, as he knew and trusted in Naruto's training and strength to be able to take out the threat of pain. So Jiraiya sacrificed himself to gain intel that ended up helping Naruto ultimately defeat pain. And with Kashin Koji being the clone of Jiraiya, and many themes are being carried over from Jiraiya's character, like the use of toads and certain jutsu like the Rasengan, it would bring that storyline that Kashin Koji is a reincarnation of Jiraiya full circle. And that is ultimately how I believe that we can fix the issues that 10 Directions introduces. And I think ultimately before the story progresses much more, we will see Kashin Koji die at the hands of Jura. And it might not even be in the way that I said. I think Kishimoto intends to make Kashin Koji's death very similar to Jiraiya's, so it could be a case of him trying to gather intel on Shinju and dying in the process, and that intel will ultimately help Boruto defeat all of the Shinju. And I think it will create one of the best moments in Boruto as a series. But let me know your thoughts on whether the introduction of 10 Directions is a good idea for the future of Boruto, as well as how you think Kishimoto can rectify this power being slightly problematic for certain plot points to progress. Anyways, if you did enjoy this video, please consider liking, as it helps this get pushed out to more and more people. Also, if you want to see more content like this, then make sure to subscribe so YouTube knows to push out more of my content to you in the future. I plan on covering a few more series later down the line, so stay tuned for them in the near future. But with that all said, I hope you enjoyed and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.